Grandma says get me out of here.
My 5-year-old daughter raised her voice while touching the wall when we visited my brother's new house.
Don't talk nonsense.
Hearing this, my brother started yelling at my child. But I could not let my daughter's words go unheard. Because this child had a mysterious power. And with her decisive words, my brother and his wife began to tremble. At that time, we had no idea that we would be involved in such a terrible thing. My name is Nancy and I married my husband Mark, who is the same age as me, when I was 27. We had a baby 2 years later and we were very happy. However, when our daughter Erica was 4 years old, Mark got a new job and we had to move to a state far away from where we were used to living. I had one concern. That was my 72-year-old mother, who now lives alone after the death of my father a few years ago. Before we moved, I used to take Erica to my parents' house to check on her. My brother Hans and his wife Emily lived nearby, but they were both busy with work, and I felt kind of bad asking them to take care of my mother. However, I was not in a place where I could immediately rush to my mother's place either, so I had to rely on my brother and his wife. Then I got a call from my mother saying, I'm moving in with them at Hans's house. At the time, she was having trouble with her legs, and I was concerned about that even after we moved out. She would be safe with my brother. Hearing that, I was relieved and patted my chest. Moreover, Emily, my brother's wife, was kind and took care of things, and my mother always praised her.
I've decided to tear down my parents' house and build a new one.
One day, I received a phone call from my brother. He told me that his house, where he lived with his mother, had many steps and seemed inconvenient for her, so he would make the new house wheelchair accessible. He said he would sell his brother's house and rebuild it with the money he had and some help from his mother. Okay, I understand. I'll come help you before you tear down the house. The day after I received the call, I returned to my parents' house to clean up the mess. I was sad to think that the house I grew up in would be gone, but my mother was very happy, so I decided it was for the best. Would I see you next after the new house was built? With that, I finished helping them and left my parents' house. Since then, I had been communicating with my mother by email on a daily basis, and we were nearing the point where our new house would soon be completed. Then, I suddenly lost contact with my mother. What's going on? I felt a stirring in my heart and decided to ask my brother Hans. What he told me was unbelievable. He told me that my mother was in need of nursing care and had gone into an institution. No, that can't be true. I've been texting her every day.
That was me pretending to be my mom and replying. She wasn't in any condition to operate her phone anymore.
Then why didn't you tell me right away?
But wouldn't it shock you to find out that your favorite mother is going through that?
Moreover, he continued,
she may not even recognize you anymore.
My mother's memory was vague. She was unable to take care of herself. Her personality had changed, and she sometimes became angry suddenly when she used to be calm. I want to see my mom.
You can't do that. She is finally able to live calmly at the facility now, but if you suddenly go there, it will only confuse her.
That may be so, but then at least tell me where she is staying.
The staff in charge has asked me not to visit her for the time being. I'll be sure to contact you when things settle down.
He hung up on me without even telling me the name of the facility. However, I was not convinced by all means, so I decided to leave my daughter with my husband on his day off and visit my brother's house alone. My brother had just gone out, and when I rang the doorbell, his wife, Emily, answered. When she saw me, she sighed loudly. You heard from Hans, right? Even we are heartbroken that we had to put your mother in a facility. I couldn't say anything more as I looked at Emily, who said this with a downcast look on her face. I know my brother and his wife must be having a hard time as well. However, just as I was about to give up and leave, a sight caught my eye. What? Why? To my surprise, I found my mother's belongings piled up in a corner of the yard. I rushed over to check it out and found that even her cherished presents and mementos from my late father had been put together in a garbage bag. It was as if my mom was nowhere to be found. I felt sad and hurt. Why is this here? I returned to my brother's house again with my mother's belongings and questioned Emily. We have to clean up this house and we can't take all of it to the facility. My new house hasn't even been handed over yet, so I have no choice but to throw it away. But that doesn't mean we have to. I understood that she had a point, but I had not yet met my mother, and I still could not accept the reality and could not forgive her. I will take care of these belongings until your mom gets better. Yes. You can do whatever you want with it. Emily shushed me and closed the front door behind her. I sighed as I drove home, her cold attitude, my disappointment, and many other thoughts running through my mind. You'll have to call me with more details about your mom from now on. When I got home, I sent one message to my brother. There was no reply, but from time to time, Hans would send me an email titled, "How Mom is Doing at the Facility." As usual, I could not see her and only heard from the person in charge, but I still felt a little lighter just to hear that she was doing well. I could feel that my brother also cared about me, and I realized how much I appreciated my siblings. A little later, Hans informed us that he had finished moving into his new house, and we decided to go to the housewarming celebration with our family of 3. The exterior of the house looked like a mansion itself, and the inside was very stylish and really nice. However, there are steps, and it doesn't look like a house that was built with my mother in mind. I was having these doubts as I was being guided around the house.
Grandma says let me out of here.
Erica, my 5-year-old daughter, suddenly said this while touching the wall. What?
Hey! You're talking nonsense.
My brother yelled at my daughter, interrupting my astonishment, and Emily glared at her as well. But what she's saying is...
Shut up.
Hans didn't want to listen to me, but in fact, my daughter has had strange powers for some time. She seemed to be able to get a sense of what it was like to be near someone in trouble or in need of help. However, this was not always to everyone, but was demonstrated only to those who were fond of Erica. Once, when a friend of mine who adored my daughter was found to be ill. She had not told my daughter about it, but the moment Erica held her hand,
Your disease will definitely be cured. You will be fine.
she told my friend. And just as she said, my friend overcame the disease that was said to be difficult to cure completely. Even after this, my daughter was quick to see through my silly worries. Because of this, we believed in Erica's magical power. My daughter tilted her head as she looked at my brother and his wife, who looked at her creepily.
She says it's so tight in here, Uncle Hans. Hurry up and get Grandma out.
Oh, no. What the hell is wrong with you, you little brat?
My brother looked at Emily and started shaking. You look strange. What the hell is going on? Perhaps noticing my stare, Hans followed us out the front door, saying, I've remembered something urgent and I need you to leave. After the door was silently closed, we had no choice but to return home. But I was still concerned that something was wrong with them. When I arrived home, the first thing I did was to check something. I was surprised to find out that my brother and his wife were, well, not quite what I expected. I knew that my brother and his wife had been. Then I made a phone call with my hands trembling with anger and began to prepare for sanctions. 3 days later, I left my daughter with my husband and visited my brother and sister-in-law alone at their new house. When I rang the intercom, Hans said,
"You can't bother me by coming without informing me."
He answered the door, yelling at me. "Can I ask you to leave? We are busy too." My brother's wife also seemed not to be pleased with my visit and wouldn't let me in. Well, of course, that was to be expected, and it was more convenient for me to be outside, so there was no problem. "I want to see my mom, so I need you to tell me where she is," I told him in a serious tone, looking at them both. Then my brother snickered and approached me with a serious face.
"I don't think Mom would want you, her daughter, to see her different self from before. Leave her alone."
"That's right. Why don't you leave your parent alone already? She's fine as long as she's in the care of her facility." Emily also set the tone for my brother, wrinkling her brow. "I can't do that." I told them so, and I said, "Please," to the people waiting outside the gate. As if on cue, 5 men in work clothes entered the property and began tearing down the walls of the house.
Hey, hey! Who are you guys? What are you doing to someone else's house?"
Hans raised his voice and stood in front of them, presenting himself to defend his new home. "These are the demolition crews. I called them and asked them to tear this place down now."
Ha! Are you insane? Why would you do that to a house that was just finished?
"That will be obvious when we tear this place down."
Just make it stop right now. I'm calling the police.
My brother was fuming with rage. I told the contractors to wait a bit and stop their work for once. "Can you call the police? Isn't it you and Emily who are in trouble?"
What are you talking about? Oh, maybe you're serious about what that creepy kid said, and you're going to dig through the walls?
"Yes. Mom's in here, you know." In fact, I wanted to be sure of that, so when I decided to sanction my brothers, I hired a contractor. My brother stared at me with a furrowed brow. "You don't believe me? But Erica really does have magical powers." "So what? It doesn't matter now. You broke someone's house, you'll have to pay for it." My brother's wife came at me with a terrible sword, and this was the first time I had ever seen her face like this. This must be Emily's true nature.
What's the use of doing that if you don't have any evidence? How many times have I told you that Mom is in an institution?
Hans now spoke as if admonishing. I ignored him and confronted him with one notebook. "I have proof. It was all written in this." It was a diary left by my mother. On that day when my brother and his wife turned me away, I went home and checked the contents of my mother's belongings that I had brought home earlier. As I was searching for clues, I found the notebook at the bottom of her bag. In it, in my mother's own handwriting, she had written about the events that had taken place since they had decided to start living together and build a house. She said that my brother's wife had been cold to her, and that Hans had asked her for money. She was supposed to help with only a part of the construction cost of the new house, but in the end, she was asked to keep the bank book and all the money was used without her permission. Furthermore, my mother, thinking that I would be worried if she told me about it, did not tell me.
That diary doesn't lead to the ludicrous suspicion that Mom is inside these walls, does it?
Even though just spending the money without permission was a problem, my brother gave me a victorious look as if it had never happened. I was taken aback and said, "This isn't the only one," and opened the page to the date the day before I lost contact with my mother. What the hell? When they saw it, they both exclaimed in shock. It contained a detailed account of a conversation between Hans and Emily that my mother had overheard by accident. It was a terrible conversation, starting with the statement that old people with no money are just in the way, followed by the words of the brother's wife, "When are you going to send your mother to the other side?" My brother seemed to be saying that Mom is always in touch with me, so if he got the timing wrong, I would find out right away. And from there, the two of them began to laugh and make terrible plans. When my mother heard this story, she must have thought that maybe her life was really in danger. Unfortunately, Emily caught my mother eavesdropping. She managed to cover it up and went back to her room, but she was planning to call me after dawn to discuss everything. However, I never heard from my mother. This must mean that my mother was killed by them after she wrote her diary. Isn't this the truth? You guys are such assholes.
This could just be Mom's imagination. You see. She may have lost the border between reality and delusion. That's why she's in an institution.
Are you still saying that? Mom is definitely here in this house. All these lies about her being in an institution.
Come on. Which are you going to believe? This diary that may or may not be true, or my story?
In my mind, I said, "Of course it's Mom, isn't it?" I held up the floor plan of the house that was tucked away on the last page of the notebook. The paper was quite tattered, showing signs of having been repeatedly folded and opened. My mother was probably looking forward to seeing her new house being built, and she may have looked over the plans again and again, imagining herself living there. It was heartbreaking to think of her feelings. Why are these walls double? It's got an entrance too, so it must be a warehouse or something. I confronted Hans with the floor plan even more forcefully and questioned him.
Well, that's a rejected blueprint. Did Mom pick it out of the trash?
Is that really true? Let's find out. I told him so and again signaled the contractors to resume their work.
Hey! You really shouldn't do that. Don't destroy our house.
Nancy. Don't just stand there with your arms crossed. Make them stop. Both my brother and Emily yelled and tried their best to stop the work, but it continued, and after a few minutes, the hole that had been drilled from the outside finally penetrated the wall. When I looked through the hole, I saw that it was a small storage room. Inside, I saw what I assumed to be my mother. Mom. Tears were spilling from my eyes as I was confronted with the fact that this is real after all. But I could not break down in tears until I sanctioned them. "I'm calling the police," I said, wiping my tears with my hand and looking them firmly in the eye.
Oh, by the way. They made a big deal about her being gone from the facility. Hey, Emily, isn't that right?
Oh. Yeah. I know it's all a blur, but maybe she remembered where the house was and came back and got in and couldn't get out.
That could be it. This is an accident. It's the facility's fault.
They soberly say, "Mom," and cover their faces with their hands. I looked coldly at their monkey business, not wanting to admit it. The police will come and check it out, You'll see. I pulled my cell phone out of my bag and was about to call the police when my brother grabbed my arm firmly.
Nancy, stop. I'll tell you everything honestly.
My brother became serious and seemed to be trying to convince me. Then tell me why you did this.
It's...
Hans began to pontificate. In fact, my brother and his wife were in debt, and it seemed from the beginning that they were looking for my mother's money to live with them. They were receiving $200 to $300 per month in exchange for taking care of her, but they were still barely able to repay the debt. Next, he asked for a large sum of money from my mother, which he used to pay off the debt. At that time, he saw a substantial amount of money in her bank book. The money had been saved without spending our father's inheritance, which had died a few years earlier. Once the debt was paid off, my brother and his wife now wanted a new house. They must have told their mother that they would take care of her in a wheelchair-accessible house. In reality, however, the house had no consideration for my mother, who has a limp, and there were steps to climb. So they took her bank book and spent it all.
Once the house is built, let's face it, old folk who need care are just in the way, right?
They had spent all their money, and of course they couldn't afford to put her in a facility. Moreover, when he heard that they were planning such a thing, he had no choice but to kill her. The fact that her memory had become fuzzy and that she had entered the facility were also lies so that I would not get suspicious.
If I dumped her somewhere and she was found, it would be a big deal. That's why I hid her inside this wall.
At first my brother was whispering, but then his voice grew louder and he became somewhat confident. But that doesn't mean.
Because it's dark under the lamp, you know. I thought no one would find her here.
Hans smirks and says outrageous things without hesitation. I could only sigh at the thought that this was my own brother.
I told you everything honestly, so don't call the police.
That can't be right.
You all need to keep quiet about this. I'll pay you if I have to.
Seeing my brother, who even started to pout at the demolition contractors, they too were dismayed. How much more pathetic would he look? Where do you think we can find that kind of money?
Oh, I'll make the money even if I have to sell this house. Just don't tell the police.
My brother looked me in the eye and cried. I don't think you can sell it because it will be treated as an accidental property. I mumbled, and his face turned blue and he looked hopeless. Then my brother's wife ran up to Hans and grabbed him by the chest. What are we going to do? We're going to get caught by the police if we don't do something. It was your fault in the first place.
Don't blame me for everything.
So you should have just dumped it in the mountains. The two of them started arguing. Hey! I tried to stop them, but my brother and his wife didn't seem to hear my voice. I had no choice but to watch them quietly for a while. Then they noticed my gaze and approached me vigorously. Hey, Nancy, listen to me. I was actually against your mother moving in with us for money from the very beginning, right? Oh, I see. I didn't do anything wrong. So just help me. It's all Hans's fault. Emily said this, and while evading responsibility, she grabbed my arm and said, "Please." She was begging me over and over again. My brother also blamed others, saying, "It's all her fault." They kept blaming each other. Please stop it. You should live your lives regretting what you have done. Spend the rest of your life making amends. I pushed them away, and my brother and his wife collapsed to their knees on the spot. At that moment, a police car called by the deconstruction contractor arrived and the two of them were dragged away. Hans and Emily were subsequently arrested. It still seemed certain that it was my mother who was inside the wall. The police thought that she must have been killed around the time I lost contact with her, given the state of her body. My brother and his wife also confessed and the case was closed. They both have a long life in prison ahead of them. Meanwhile, we were able to hold a funeral for my mother and say goodbye to her well. I hope we were able to make up for her loss a little. When I looked up at the blue sky, I felt like my mother was smiling at me. What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.